ladies and gentlemen. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Rodri, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Dartington Hall Trust. And I'd just like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone that's here in the auditorium, to those who are listening via Standard Radio or online, and not least to our panel of parliamentary candidates. Thank you all for participating in this evening's event. When the election was announced so suddenly, we took a very swift decision to put on this Hustings event at Dartington. I'd like to thank my team, led by Carrie Goddard, for turning this event around so quickly. It felt like the right thing for Dartington to do, not least because of our renewed focus on making this amazing place a focus for an open sort of space, actually, for debate and discussion about the issues facing our society and our world today. So I hope that this evening's event is the first in a long line of events that you'll have the opportunity to participate in. I'd like to introduce you very quickly to Jonathan Cooper, OBE, who is our chairman for this evening. Jonathan is an internationally respected human rights barrister working across the political spectrum with government and civil society to further the cause of human rights. He's also a resident of South Hams and a former student of Quebec's and Dartington Hall School. So I'd like to hand over to Jonathan. I hope that all of us will cooperate with Jonathan so that we all get the most out of this evening's discussion. Thank you.
Rodri, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be back here at Dartington and in this hall in particular. And it's a real pleasure to be chairing this event with all of you. And it's an important event, and it's an exciting event. It's being recorded. I think we're even on the television as well, my understanding. Totnes is an extraordinary constituency because it stretches from Brixham up to Dartmoor to Kingsbridge to Salcombe. And Dartington is now trying to reach out to you all with this event to open up this constituency to you, for you to make up your mind about who you want as your MP. We have 4 remarkable people, all of whom who could do the job, but before we get to them, I'm going to give you a little bit of housekeeping. If there is an emergency, we have stewards in the hall, and we must do what they say. So if there is an emergency, any form of emergency, the stewards will give us instructions as what we need to do. So I'm going to say no more about housekeeping, but just to give you the aim of this event. It is a kind of a question time event. We are going to be, there will be questions from the floor which we've selected, that you've submitted and that we've selected, and it's an opportunity for us to hear from the candidates. And so we can hear from them from their national policies as well as their local policies. And it's an opportunity for you to get to know them and to get an understanding of those individuals. And in my opinion, all of the candidates that are on this panel this evening could be our representative in Westminster. I think we're incredibly fortunate to have such quality candidates standing for the main political parties here in Totnes. UKIP were invited to attend, but unfortunately they were unable to come this evening. But of course, this is a very hard week for all of us. And if I may, can I just quote you Maya Angelou? And she has said this: "Hate, it has caused a lot of problems in the world, but it hasn't solved any yet." We want, at this point, to have a 1-minute silence in honour and in commemoration of those wonderful people who lost their lives and got caught up in such awful violence in Manchester just a few nights ago. We also want to celebrate the life of Jo Cox, who a year ago, the MP, a year ago was murdered, and she obviously lost her life. And I could go on to talk about the atrocities committed in the name of hate. Again, a year ago there was the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, where 50 young LGBT people lost their lives. And so I think this is an appropriate moment just to have a minute's silence to reflect upon those who have suffered at the hands of hate. But this evening we celebrate democracy. And in that spirit, I ask that we all show respect for each other, kindness towards each other, and that we approach this evening almost as a blank sheet of paper. And we absorb the thoughts and ideas of these remarkable people that I'm lucky enough to share the panel with. And we form a view as to how we might vote in a few weeks on the basis of what they have to say and what their parties have to say. And so this is how the evening will progress. First of all, each of the candidates can sell themselves. They have only 2 minutes in which to sell themselves, but we're going to give them that chance to plug themselves for 2 minutes. And then I'll deal with the questions that have been submitted. We had loads of really great questions submitted, and Kerry from the hall went through them with others, and she identified the key questions that you all submitted that cover a range of subjects that we want to have raised this evening. And so I'll ask the questioner, we put the question, and they'll stand up and they'll give us their question, then we'll hear from the candidates. And then we probably will go back to the floor and ask for any clarifications or any of your thoughts on the question and the way in which the questions have been answered. And then I may or may not go back to the questioner. But if I do come to you on the floor, we ask you not to make grandstanding statements or speeches. We ask you to ask our panellists to further clarify what they've said or possibly raise your own questions with you. You do need the microphone because it is all being recorded, so don't forget you must wait for the microphone in order to ask your question. To be honest, if anyone is rude enough to heckle, fortunately for those listening in, they won't hear you, so your heckling will be of little avail, and it will just really be slightly disruptive for the rest of the proceedings. After the event, there will be a podcast which you can download and listen to again at your leisure, should you wish to do so. But now it's my real pleasure to introduce these rather brilliant candidates that we have standing for Totnes, 3 of whom have democratic representative experience, and one is obviously aspiring to that, but has her own democratic experience as a trades union activist. So we have JBrazil, who's here representing the Labour Party. She is a trades union member dealing with equality for trades union. We have JBrazil. He is a Lib Dem councillor at Devon County Council, on my far left. We have SWollaston for the Conservative Party, has been Totnes' MP, and we have Jackie Hodgson to my right, representing the Green Party. Jackie is also a councillor at Devon County Council representing Totnes. Their 2 minutes, the order for them to make their 2-minute statements goes as follows. First of all, we drew this out of a hat just now. First of all, it's Sarah, then it's Jerry, then Jackie, and last but not least, we'll have Julia. So, Sarah, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan and Roger, for hosting this. I think it's very important that we carry on. We're on the threshold of momentous change as Britain prepares to leave the European Union. And however all of us voted in that referendum as our personal votes, we all want the same thing. We want the best for our families, our communities and our nation as we negotiate this very difficult 5 years. Oh, sorry, I'll try and speak up a bit. I'm sorry, I'm naturally softly spoken. So how we negotiate that path is going to be the key challenge facing the next government, but it isn't the only challenge. And I think that we have a crucial domestic agenda that we have to pay close attention to. And whoever you elect as your representative, they absolutely must keep their eyes on their core task, which is representing the views of their constituents back into central government and holding government to account. I hope that that you will feel that I have done a good job in representing this constituency and to also to the work that I've done in terms of scrutiny and accountability at national level. But I think it's absolutely important that everybody can see that there's such a clear choice in this election and so many issues that I hope we'll have a chance to air this evening.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I'm now going to move over to Jerry. Thank you, Jerry.
Hello everyone, I'm JBrazil, I'm a Labour candidate. Once again, thanks to Rodri for holding this and thanks to Kerry for helping to organise. Firstly, a bit about me. I was brought up in a council house by very hard-working parents. I've worked all my life in various different jobs, and among other roles, I'm now an equalities rep for the Retail Trade Union, and I work in Kingsbridge on a daily basis. Recently, I was added to the executive for the South West TUC, and I do a lot of work in the community, including working at the food bank, so I see on a daily basis the struggles that people are making currently. I'm very much a people's person. I'm quite often told to calm down and be quiet. I'm proud to be standing as a Labour candidate in Totnes on a manifesto that includes more money for our National Health Service, a National Care Service, keeping the triple lock on the winter fuel allowance for all pensioners, free university fees for students, school budgets restored and free childcare and early years support, fair rents and affordable homes for all, taking back into public ownership the railways, energy companies and water. All of our policies are fully costed, unlike the Conservatives, who have not told us how those will be paid for. This is an exciting manifesto that I look forward to helping implement.
Thank you very much, Jerry. So over to Jackie from the Green Party.
Thank you. I invite you to imagine a government that trusts in our common humanity and our capacity to govern ourselves. Imagine a government that believes that the best way forward is by working with each other rather than against each other. Imagine a government that priorities the rights of citizens and the environment over those of corporations. Imagine a government that gives everyone a chance and leaves nobody behind in a confident and caring Britain. That's the kind of government we, the Green Party, would work for. And this is what Green MPs promise to do for you and the people and the places you love. We will campaign for your right to vote on the final terms of the Brexit deal, including an option to stay in the EU. We will push for genuinely affordable, warm homes for everyone and a public health service system free for all. We will fight for proper reinvestment in schools and education. We will ensure the needs of older and younger people and the next generation are respected and protected. We will fight for equality and for a society where nobody is left behind. We will always act strongly on climate change and to protect the natural world we love. We will stand up for what matters. This is my pledge and our Green guarantee to you, the voters, our residents in this wonderful area of Totnes Constituency.
Great, thank you very much, Jackie. So now over to Julian.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for everyone that's here and for those that organise this event. My name is JBrazil and I live locally. My family use local schools, doctor surgeries, and can't afford to buy a house. This is the third time that I've stood in this constituency, and that's because this is the only place that I want to represent as an MP. I first became involved in politics as an environment researcher at Westminster for Matthew Taylor, who was the spokesman for the Liberal Democrats at that time, and then later for Charles Kennedy when he was leader, and he was a very special man. I'm a local councillor and I work helping with the accounts for a number of local businesses. I'm a former teacher and I play cricket, darts and euchre. Why do I want to be your MP? Well, when I look at our country, I just worry about the direction that we're going in. It seems to me that we're becoming more and more selfish as a country. We're losing those classic British values of tolerance, of inclusiveness, of helping those less fortunate than ourselves, and welcoming those fleeing from persecution. That's not the kind of country I want to live in, and I'd like to be your MP so that I can try and prevent that from happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julian. Those are the 2-minute statements that we've had from our prospective candidates. The genius of the way in which Dartington Hall has approached this event is that they reached out to people in advance of it and before the tickets were made publicly available in order to ensure that they got access to the relevant and the key communities in the Totnes Constituency. So they reached out to the farming communities, the fisheries communities, they reached out to the trade union movement, to the care homes, to the schools, to the healthcare providers. And so we really do have an extraordinary range of questions. And the reason why it was slight genius is it meant that actually, once the tickets were made publicly available, people who were committed to particular political parties couldn't necessarily get a seat. So this is a genuine reflection of our wonderful constituency, which is Totnes. I'm now going to approach the questions, and we have a first question from Robert Hodgson, who I believe is up in the balcony. Robert, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Robert, and I'd like to ask the panel, to stop another terrorist attack, what measures would you put in place?
Thank you very much, Robert. It's a crucial question for this session. So I'm going to go first, if I may, to Jackie to respond to that.
Thank you, Robert, for your question. Obviously, many people are still reeling dreadfully from this terrible event that happened in Manchester earlier this week. And our hearts, obviously, as has been said earlier, go out to all those affected, but it actually affects us all. It leaves us all wondering what we can best do at all different levels. We need to build a safer world. This is an area of deep compassion, and I've been part of the South Devon refugee network that's been supporting refugees from Syria and asylum seekers for the last couple of years. And through that lens, I've seen just how many people actively want to be involved and take responsibility for people who have less easy lives in all parts of the world. And I think this attitude builds a safer world. I think that building relationships, building communities. And as the Green Party has policies to make it a safer world. We wouldn't reinvest in Trident. But we also think that we need to look at our foreign policies and how we can make better ethics in that. I know we don't want to we're asked not to speak too long on this topic, so I just want to say that the main thing is to never lose sight of a peaceful world, a place of peace and love. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. And Sarah.
Well, I think first of all we mustn't let them win, and we mustn't let them undermine the values that we hold most important. And I think we mustn't let them divide our society, because that is their aim. So that's the first thing we need to do. And secondly, we need to put in place measures that counter the sort of hateful ideology that underpins what they do. And we need to here actually be looking at how we can best disrupt their networks, undermine their funding, and that means that we need to put resources in properly to our security services. But then finally, there's that very difficult balance that we have to strike between not letting them undermine our values of free speech, but also recognising that ultimately there are limits to that. There are limits to what we should allow on the internet. So how do we disrupt the networks that allow their propaganda to continue and their recruiting networks? And there is a very difficult conversation we need to have as a society about how much we allow security services to actually follow and track those who are a risk to our society. And there are many people who contact me to say that there should be complete freedom online and on the internet, and others who feel very strongly that we have to protect our citizens. So I think there are difficult conversations, and also we have to prepare, because we can't stop every attack. So we need to make sure that we are prepared and we can deal with that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. So I'm going to go now to Julian.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I was really dreading this question, actually. I mean, it's such a tragedy. What can one say? I mean, in your opening remarks, you talked about hate and how it doesn't achieve anything. And Jackie mentioned love in her comments, and I think that, that's so right. Just a couple of things I'd say, and that is I 100% support our overseas aid budget. I think it does more to prevent failed states abroad, which breeds this kind of corrupted ideology, which is then imported to this country. And the second point I'd say is education. Education is so important for so many reasons, but one of it is that if you have a well-educated population, they're much less likely to be corrupted by this kind of sick ideology that can allow the young children to be killed, as we saw in Manchester.
I mean, just an observation on that was that the bomber, certainly he attended the University of Salford, so he was educated.
He was British born and bred.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. I think...
And well educated.
Well, well, I just think that maybe we need a more rounded education rather than just pointed at stats and things like that. But something's going wrong, and I just say, it's such a tragedy. Words fail at the moment. It's so upsetting, particularly for young people like the young man that brought that up. It must be such a confusing world that we live in, that somebody can be driven to do something so awful.
Thank you. Jerry.
I think it's important to remember that it's a young person who's actually asked this question. So firstly, my heartfelt thanks go out to the public services who dropped everything and responded so quickly that night. I think they proved to us just how important it is that we remain calm. We're committed to doing everything we can to prevent terrorism, and investments needed in our public services, and that's in order to make our children feel safe, which also includes the police and the National Health Service. Julian touched on education. I think it's important that while teaching our children about the events of what happened Monday night, that we don't shy away and try to protect them from what's happened, but we deal with our own children in a different way.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Robert, do you feel that you've got full answers to your question? Yeah, you do. Thank you very much. Can I ask the floor? I mean, Sarah raised that very tense, difficult issue, almost security versus liberty, and what is the right balance? How do you get the right balance? Does anybody want to respond to either that point or some of the other points that have been raised? Yes, the lady here. Do you want to wait for the microphone?
Thank you. I'm Alison Williams, and I'd like to mention a couple of things that I've read today, actually. One was that I think that there were 5 warnings given. Obviously, it's early days and there must be an inquiry and so on, and all the facts must come to light. But I understand he was banned from the perpetrator was banned from his own mosque, and several members of his own family had warned that he was dangerous. And the other thing I would mention is 20,000 police, I believe, have been lost since 2009, and I do feel that that's played a part, because amongst those police lost were specially trained handlers of sniffer dogs and so on.
Thank you very much. Is there another point? Yeah, please, yes, with the striped jersey. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sandy Gilbert, and I feel that really we have to study the fundamentals of what is happening, and the only answer I can think lies with the women of in Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iraq, that we need to support them and their children to be educated and find the confidence and the strength, each individual, as to actually make changes within each family and each community, because that's the only way. We can't, it doesn't matter how many numbers of police we have on the street and how specially they are trained, you cannot stop one crazy individual. So the answer lies with the women, back in the source, in the home, in those cultures, in my view.
Thank you very much, Annie. This will be the last question observation on this point. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Gavin Fennell. Hatred doesn't come from nowhere. Hatred has its roots in oppression, in deprivation, in famine, in people being blown up around the world. People are not naturally hateful. There are causes and reasons why people turn their hatred on other people. And I think we are talking about looking at peace and wanting peace within our societies. But we have to look at what roots there are, the causes of the hatred. And I think if we are participating, if we are actively supporting and participating in systems that destroy people's lives, that allow people to starve, that allow children to die of illnesses in other parts of the world, we are sowing the seeds of the millions of people who will come to our shores, who we will not know what their views are of our societies. We need to look at, and as you mentioned, the foreign aid program is vital to ensure that people do not become hatred and generate hatred within them.
Thank you very much, Mark. Going to move on from that particular issue at this stage, and it may be at the very end we can come back to it if there is time. I know it's such a pressing, important issue for us all. And I'm going to turn to my second question, which is from Richard Hosking. The microphone.
Good evening, Jonathan. Good evening, candidates. My question is, how important do you consider it to be for future generations that the UK government turns the deficit into surplus and reduces the national debt? And how do you believe this is best achieved?
Well, we'll turn to Sarah first. Thank you.
Well, I think it is very important, because if we keep increasing the gap between what we earn as a nation and what we spend, we're heaping that debt onto our grandchildren's generation, because somewhere along the line somebody has to be responsible for it. And I believe that actually having a sound economy underpins everything else that we do, because it pays for all the services that we care about. So we mustn't lose sight of our economy. And I think at this particular point, as we're also at a turning point with our relationship with the European Union, it's more important than ever that we safeguard our economy. And that means that we have to make sure that we nurture business, and we look at how we can be a free trading nation. And all of that really matters. And I think it does matter that we continue to narrow the gap. I think it's been a very painful time over the last 7 years, very difficult choices. And I think this isn't the time to put that into reverse and find ourselves having to start from scratch all over again.
Thank you, Sarah. Jerry.
Yeah, I agree, it's very important. We are the only major developed economy where earnings have fallen as growth has started. I think it's important to focus on tax avoidance and corporate taxes and to make sure that the money that we should be reaping, we are reaping, and people aren't getting away with registering businesses offshore to ensure that they don't have to pay tax in the UK.
Jackie.
Thank you. I think we have to look at this slightly differently. I think we've been sold the whole idea that we're constantly getting further and further into debt, and yet we are a wealthy country. We're a seriously wealthy country, and I think we should recognise that and then start to think, well, where does the money go if everybody's feeling the pinch? And as a councillor since 2009, I'm very aware that the impact on local authorities and effectively the chaos that has been caused to not only the staff but all the services, and people are hearing all sorts of things, and there's awful things come dropped in like the bedroom tax, and the Green Party doesn't buy this story, and we actually look at where we can maybe make better savings, but actually bring the money back towards the public rather than it spilling into the private sector all the time. And it is constantly draining out of the public sector. Ever since we did a lot of these public-private enterprise mixtures, so that we were actually finance situations, so that we still have to have publicly funded monitoring officers, but often they're watching over private institutions who are delivering the services or carrying on doing the deal that actually makes them the money. And yet we don't see the profit, so it's actually a constant drain. And I think it's been, to be frank, it's been a deliberate ploy to actually undermine the public services. But what would the Green Party do? How would we get some money? Well, we wouldn't reinvest in Trident, as I said earlier, and that would raise about 110 billion between now and 2030. And that's not an inconsiderable amount of money. Another issue we would look at is the Robin Hood tax that many of you may have heard of. This is also a high finance trading tax. It's 0.5% of high finance deals, and if we think about the size of some of those financial deals, it actually would generate a lot of money. And also we would look at closing some of these tax loopholes. There's a lot of tax loopholes that wise industries have managed to find their ways into and do very well out of the public purse. And when that money comes back into the public purse, we can do the things that we really want to do, which is to reinvest in our NHS, our education, our local authority services, our transport services, and we would have a much better world. The world I suggested we imagined when I started speaking this evening. And it's not impossible, we just need to be much more stringent and make sure that the party donors don't have their seats at the table where the decisions are being made. Because frankly, I think there's actually, I would call that corruption, and I think it's a corruption that we've seen through some of the devolution bids that most people in this room won't have heard an awful lot about or know what the deals are. But a lot of money has been pouring into this area in the last few years to what's called the Local Enterprise Partnership. And that money is being sorted out by a group of business people. They don't come and ask us what they should be doing with that 4.3 million.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I do believe it is right that we should try and get rid of our deficit, and then I think the debt would come down as a result. But the issue is, where does the burden fall for reducing that deficit? And I think that the problem that we see now in this country is that burden is falling unfairly on the poorest and most vulnerable in our society. And what we need to do is we need to rebalance it so that those that can afford more pay a bit more, because we're not seeing that, and that's why the inequality is growing in this country, where the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer. So I agree with the question, but I think we probably disagree on how best to solve it. Thank you.
So, this is the fundamental question. It was certainly the fundamental question in the 2015 election. And it's only 2 years on from that, and so have things really moved on? So now let's hear from you. So the lady here, yeah.
Hi, my name is Susanna Chapman, and just to be clear, I am a member of the Labour Party. I would like to refute a myth that goes around that Labour is worse at handling the economy than the Tories. Because what we always hear is, oh, the Conservatives know how to balance the economy, it's in safe hands with them. I did some research, and this comes from a website of an independent tax advisor, because he was curious about it, and the figures come from the House of Commons Library. And it covers the 70 years from 1945 to 2015. In that time, Labour were in office for 28 years, the Conservatives were in office for 42 years. Now, this guy has done research on what was borrowed by each party and what was paid back of the national debt. I'm going to cut a long story short, he's balanced it so that these are 2014 prices, so we're talking about the same kind of things. In that time, the Labour Party in 2014 prices borrowed an average of 26.8 billion per year that they were in office. The Tories borrowed 33.5 billion more. Labour paid back of the national debt. They paid back 100. I'll do it per year. Where's that? But they paid back a total of 108 billion, and the Conservatives paid back a total of 20 billion.
I think we are getting the point, and it's very well made.
So what I wanted to say is, you know, these are independent figures. Labour has borrowed less and paid back more.
Thank you for that clarification. So, the question was about his hand.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Tony Greenham. I have to point out a fundamental flaw with the question. So the questioner asked whether how important it was that the government should run a surplus. Were the government to consistently run a surplus, this would be a disaster for the economy. I should mention that I'm an economist. Because what paying our way as a nation really means is that we are able to pay for our imports with our exports. This country's economy has been appalling, measured on that basis. We have a massive trade deficit. We cannot pay our way in the world. So we run a huge deficit against the rest of the world. So the way the economy works is that means that there has to be a deficit somewhere else. Now, the government can run a deficit, as it currently does. If it runs a surplus, the only other sector of the economy is all of us in this room. And that means that we have to run a deficit. So when we talk about the government running a surplus, what that actually means is that all of us get more and more and more into debt. So I'm afraid that people who say the government has to run a surplus, otherwise we are heaping debt on our children, what they really mean is, I would like the government to run a surplus because I'm amongst the wealthy elites, and I would much rather that ordinary people bore the debt and that their grandchildren had to pay those debts off. Which is why those who claim that they want to cut the deficit and run a surplus, you will find that they will argue that they need to cut taxes for the rich. It's not actually their grandchildren that obviously that want to bear the burden of paying for public services. So the government should run a deficit.
Thank you. Yeah.
I think it's important that thanks to Susanna for pointing out those facts, and I do agree, the problem with suddenly turning into a surplus, it kind of also almost makes the country become a business, which we're not. But it's also important to remember that to improve the economy, you need to give poor people money. Poor people spend money, they buy what they need, and then they go on to buy what they want. It's a proven fact the rich fat cats just sit on their money. and they pass it on to their children, and they pass it on. So it's important to understand that it's actually the lowest earners who do need to be paid more, who do need a better income, because it will be them who reboost our economy.
Thank you, Jerry. So, Jackie.
Thank you. Yes, I think actually Tony makes really solid points around, you know, how we should or shouldn't be looking at the bigger picture of our debts and surpluses. But actually, I'd like to suggest that we think about how we can actually build that surplus into things that aren't necessarily registered as money, but actual real assets, not just housing assets, but our green spaces and the quality of our environment. If we invest in that, then we have something that can't be taken away or traded. It's actually something that benefits us all, and it's a good investment for health and well-being, for all elements of the things that we really want and value. And the other thing I would just say is, one of the things I think is awful is that we've borrowed against our future, and now we're seeing how that's rolling out. It's actually we've borrowed against the next generation. So those young people are picking up big debts when they come out of college. And I think there's something very wrong there, and very double standards for the people who've actually made those decisions, because they have free access to education, etc. Not our young people who can't even afford somewhere to live.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Sarah, Tony, an economist, says that the Conservative Party's economic policies are deeply flawed.
Well, of course, there's a range of opinion on this, but I would say that our economy is healing, and that if we put this into reverse, we destroy jobs. That's the point, is that sometimes there's an attitude that business is somehow a great evil. I think that we should be nurturing our business, because this strong economy and successful business creates jobs, and that really matters. And I think what we risk doing, unless we take a sensible approach to this, particularly, as I say, at a time of great change as we leave the European Union, is that we could see, again, unemployment rising, and that drives poverty. And unless we have successful businesses, we cannot afford to pay for all the things that we all care about in this room, because that is dependent on our economy being successful.
We have so much ground that we want to cover this evening that I'm going to move on to the next issue, which is education. And I'd like Alison Caudwell to put her question, please. Alison? There, Alison's here.
Hi, good evening. I've been a teacher for 20 years, and I was on a demonstration at the weekend, along with many people in this room, in Totnes, about massive cuts to education. What does the panel think how schools and children are being affected by these cuts?
Thank you, Alison. The education cuts, big issue for Totnes, big demonstration on Saturday. Julian?
Yeah, big issue for the whole area. Totnes, Kingsbridge, Salcombe, Dartmouth, all having budgets cut. It's an absolute disaster. It's just not what this country should be doing. We want to be able to compete in an international market. You know, at the very least, we need to have our children educated. And that's just the hard-nosed look at it. From a more sort of soft side, we talked before about terrorism. If we want our children to grow up with a rounded education, we've got to invest in it. And I've been very proud of the Liberal Democrat record in education. We originally had the penny on income tax to pay for education. We've put that into the health service this time round, but we're still looking to invest an extra £7 billion into education, and particularly targeted at the poorest and the most vulnerable, increasing the pupils' premium. It is so vitally important that we invest in our education that I think any government that fails to do so is letting us all down, and words fail me to try and justify their thinking behind it.
Thank you very much.
I was at the demonstration as well on Saturday, and it was extraordinary to witness the headmaster, Alan Salt, of Kevix, speaking. I thought it was heart-rending, and I thought, how could it come to this, that the headmaster has to go to the streets? and actually talked to the people rallying, and it was a huge demonstration. It was really impressive, and there was a lot of people there who just wanted to see some change. And it's, you know, it's a huge cut. It's a huge jump. I mean, he talked about 100 teachers in Devon already being lost this year. That's a big impact on schools. And it's also about the quality of teaching that starts to be affected, because it means that the extra teachers that look after some of the children with special needs or disabilities in the classroom, they're the first ones who will feel the pinch of this. As well as the fact that we've got, the schools are being sent into chaos, so people like Alison, who's a good headmaster, are having to worry more about how to meet their budgets, rather than actually how to make sure that the school is doing the right thing with the teaching and the mentoring and all the rest of it. And I just think we need to look carefully at what's been going on in schools anyway. I mean, the Green Party would abolish the SATs. We don't think the SATs is a good programme. We think it's putting stress on children. And if you look at other systems, I think it's the Finnish system, where children actually, you know, they don't have all this constant challenging assessments. They are actually able to enjoy play. In fact, the Green Party would start formal education at the age of 7, not at 5. We would fund education up to there, but it would be more play-based. Give children a real chance to enjoy their lives and their youth and build those social structures before they start getting filled with facts and figures, so they're more relaxed and receptive to education. And I think these are key things that actually make a difference to children. And if we're just going to see schools being cut, and with a school like Kevick saying in 2 years' time we don't know what we're going to do, then there's something very, very remiss and irresponsible about what the government has been suggesting. And the Green Party would certainly nationalise all the schools back in and bring in those public schools and the free schools and the academies back into the public system and make sure they're properly funding and fill that funding gap.
I read in the Western Morning News last week that in their survey of the party manifestos, that the Labour's education policies were the policies that were most favoured by the people in the West Country. So, Jerry, over to you.
The Labour Party are going back to an old trade union adage of education lifelong and free for all. Our constituency actually covers 2 different areas. It covers the South Hams and it also covers Torbay. And Torbay is considered one of the most deprived areas in the country. And it's quite shocking to know that there's 1,275 children in Torbay being taught in primary school, in primary classes over 30. It's scary to know that there's 29 unqualified teachers teaching our children in the Torbay part of our constituency. That's an awful lot of unqualified teachers. There's 3,000 schools that have been rated less than good by Ofsted, and that's not because of the poor teaching quality, that's because the teachers don't have time to teach. There's been an increase of 52% of unqualified teachers around the UK since 2012. That's a huge amount of people that we're putting in charge of our children's lives every day and their education that we expect to follow a certain pattern. Now, I'm not saying these unqualified teachers are any less able to teach our children, but however, they're being paid less to do the same job with the same expectations. And I think that's wrong. I think anyone teaching, whether they're teaching children, adults, or pensioners even, should be given the recognition they deserve as passing on vital information, vital knowledge, and something that we all do every day, and we all learn something new, and we should all be able to do it free from the day we're born right up until the day that we die.
Thank you very much, Jerry. Sarah.
Thank you. Devon suffers particularly because of historic inbuilt funding injustice. We are the 30th worst funded local authority area in the country, and as a result of that we receive on average around £290 less per child. And I think that there is something that we need to do to correct that injustice. And of course, everyone in this room would recognise the importance of waiting for deprivation and for the extra costs If one's teaching in a school, for example, where English isn't the first language, and it's absolutely right that we protect the pupil premium and many of those measures. However, the way that the age-weighted funding per pupil is distributed really disadvantages areas like Devon. So I think there does need to be a fair funding review, and the existing review proposals, while they do benefit some small rural schools, they are disadvantaging some of our larger secondary schools. And in addition to that, I think there are pressures that do need to be addressed. For example, the impact of the apprenticeship levy, because some schools where they may be receiving a small uplift, actually you're finding that's all cancelled out by an apprenticeship levy. So I think we do need a genuinely fair funding review that recognises the costs for educating every child and how that formula is working. And we also need to look at the other cost pressures facing our schools.
Alison, do you want to come back and ask for further clarification? Do you feel they've answered your question?
Labour and the Lib Democrats have understood a bit about what's going on in classes and the impact on teachers, classrooms and pupils. I think fudging the issue, quite frankly, about effect funding. There's lots of things going on all over the country. It's not just about Devon.
But I would come back to that and say that those schools that under the existing funding review look set to lose funding, as part of the Conservative manifesto, it's been promised that none of them will lose funding as a result of that. But I accept that there are huge pressures in all of our public services. I do accept that, and I also realise that within our schools, where those funding pressures are very severe, it's sometimes the value-added things that get lost. And if we look around the enrichment activities around that actually help to maintain mental health and well-being in our schools, those are the things that can sometimes go first. So I absolutely accept the challenge. What I'm saying is that when you look at schools around the country, we visited on the Health Select Committee schools in Camden, and you look at what they are able to achieve because of the extra funding that they receive, you can see the difference. And so I think there is a historical injustice, and I think that will be part of addressing it, but it's not the only thing.
Can I just take this gentleman here with the check shirt? Where's your hand around?
Thank you. My name is Kenny Birchall. I have my son goes to Dartington and my daughter goes to Kenwick, so I feel quite at the centre of this. Yeah, the funding issue that Sarah raises is an issue, but it's a minor issue. Let's face it. There is money in education, right? It's being pumped into free schools. It's being pumped into academies, and it's going to be pumped into grammar schools. So, as Jackie pointed out earlier, austerity is not economic. It's political and it's ideological. What's happening in education is not to do with economics and funding formulas, Sarah. It's ideological. And I can see, so academies, they're part of chains, aren't they? A little bit like Debenhams or W.H. Smith. They're chains, aren't they? And this is the goal. I mean, it would be great if you could be honest about that.
No, can I
this
come
is
back
the goal,
to you
isn't
on
it?
one of these
It's important. My daughter is choosing her I almost call them O-levels, her GCSEs, and she's made her choices, but she doesn't know where the courses are going to run because they don't have the funds to run the courses in the performing arts. The ones in that section. That's what that school's all about. My son has special needs, and he's facing these in his one-to-one at Dartington. This is what it's about, Sarah.
Okay.
Not about
I'm going to let
performing.
Sarah come in now, and I'll go to
What I think we have to also recognise is that there are 1.8 million more children now being taught in schools that are being rated as good or outstanding. So yes, I absolutely recognise the challenge that you've set out, but I also think when we talk about these things being ideological, I think it is absolutely right that we focus on equipping young people to have success and to be able to go out in the world. And I think that having good and outstanding schools is an important thing. That's not ideological. That's, I think, it's crucial that we have good or outstanding schools. What I would say, and I concede, is that if things like that are starting to work, it's around leadership, it's around the quality of education and good teaching, all of those things. Yes, I agree with you that we could be doing more to focus on that rather than go down other routes. But I think to describe chains as being akin to Debenhams, I don't agree with you there. I think we should think of them like federations of schools that are all able to support each other. Because sometimes you can reduce back office costs by working in a group, and you can share skills. So I don't see that as some kind of sinister thing to have academies working in networks and change, because they also work across primary towards secondary school. So that actually they can help to make that transition from primary to secondary easier. So I think just to label all things as chains as automatically being a bad thing, I'm afraid I don't agree with you there, but I do agree with some of the other points that you make.
Thank you very much. Can I take the lady over the glasses? You need to raise your hand again. Yeah.
My name's Hilary Price. I'm Chair of Governance at Totnes St John's. About 15 years ago, I was part of a cuts campaign, and unfortunately I find myself agreeing with Sarah that the fundamental per pupil funding in this area is far too low. You hear a lot of rhetoric about more money going into the system, but there has been nothing done to address the disparities that we have. Our school, if we went to become an academy, we would get a little bit extra money, we'd get the same per pupil funding. So some academies, may be part of chains, they may be able to access other funding. We are stuck with the amount of money that we have. Every year is incredibly tight, incredibly hard. Some of the losses in funding is due to demographics. Some secondary schools have got fewer numbers. Others are really stretched, are really under massive pressure. And the recent changes to what's ostensibly been flagged up as a national funding formula are tinkering around the edges. What's happened is that the schools that get the most are not being cut, and those who are at the bottom are getting a little bit, but why should it be right that in this area our children's education is valued far less than children in another part of the country? With all the caveats that Sarah said about giving additional funding for particular needs in particular areas. As I said, 15 years ago plus, I was setting a deficit budget and on the streets of Totnes, and I went to Parliament. Nothing has changed, and I would like any party to try and redress that balance so there is a national funding formula, so we all start from the same level playing field.
Okay, well, let's...
Yes, thank you. I must say, I do kind of despair when I hear Sarah mentioning that let's do a fair funding review. The reality is we know how hard up the schools are, so let's just look at what we actually need. What do we need to fill that gap? And I fully understand where the teacher from St John's is coming from, sorry, the Grove, St John's, is coming from. It's really serious what we're actually dealing with. I mean, we're looking at sort of Kevix losing best part of $500,000. That's a massive hole in just trying to keep the show on the road. And these are the kind of things that we just shouldn't be seeing. Schools shouldn't be put through this. And at national level, it should not come to this. I feel it's really wrong, and I think we just have to properly fund our schools, and we can do it.
Well, my understanding of what you were saying, Hilary, is that this isn't just an issue for the Conservative government. It was the coalition government, and before then it was the Labour government. Is that correct? Is that correct? Yeah, yeah. And so therefore, how do you address that, Julian? That this is, you were in, the Liberal Democrats were part of the coalition government, and
we were, and we introduced the pupil premium, which I hope that you recognise was a good move, and we're looking to treble that. Can I just say that in the end, what this is down is, it's like, how much do you value our children's education? Do you want to prioritise tax cuts for corporations, or do you want to invest more in our children's education? It's a simple choice, no faffing around the edges. The schools need more money, need to raise taxes or to stop tax cuts to get it, and it's as simple as that. We can talk about academies and think, personally I don't like them at all. Free schools I don't like. The idea of reintroducing grammar schools is just utter madness. You know, if you look at areas where they have grammar schools, the grammar schools are great. And those fortunate enough to go to the grammar schools, well done and congratulations. But for those that don't, most of our SINC schools in this country are found in areas where they have grammar schools. And yet this Prime Minister, or the Prime Minister we have, just seems hell-bent on pressing ahead with a personal prejudice that somehow grammar schools are going to be the great saviour and bring the social mobility that we need to this country. And it's just not the case. If only she would listen to the experts, which are the teachers, who actually understand what goes on and what we need. We need more money and not tax cuts for wealthy corporations.
But it's a systemic... It's a systemic failure that began with the Labour government, the last Labour government.
It is, you're quite correct. However, I have to say I don't agree with Julian very often, but I do agree that academies, grammars and free schools have no place in our education system as it is now, other than what we have already. What we have already is absolutely amazing. However, we don't need to increase on that. What we need to increase on is education for those who are not in that top 10% of outstanding children. Children who need the basic fundamental education. Labour have said they're quite committed to a new national education service, which will be overseen, and create a fairer funding system, looking at the huge gap between what our children receive and others. I sent out letters to the schools at the beginning of this week, and 35 out of 36 schools in this constituency face huge cuts. There is only one that faces an increase in their funding, and that's of about £12,000.
Thank you very much. I'm going to now move on to the next and the biggest issue facing the next Parliament, which is, of course, Brexit. So I have a question from Mr. Arthur Durant. Please, Arthur, yeah.
Thank you very much. In last year's referendum, a majority of those who voted in South Hams wished to remain in the European Union. How do you propose to represent them in the next Parliament?
Jerry.
I was with those people, I was a Remainer myself. However, I think that despite the fact that I do believe the national parties lie to the people of the country, and I don't believe that people made an educated decision. I think there was too many facts and figures that were hidden from us all. However, being a trade unionist, my priority is to protect the working people of the country, the people who work here on European visas, the people who have everyday working rights that we've been granted through the EU, the health and safety at work rights, the normal holiday, maternity, paternity rights. They're things that we all take for granted right now. But with a hard Brexit that's proposed by the Tories, all these laws that we currently use and rely on could disappear and could be rewritten without any of us being able to vote on those.
Thank you. The Liberal Democrats have always been an unashamedly very pro-European party, and I'll read you a quick précis at the beginning of their manifesto. It says, "Whatever its imperfections, the EU remains the best framework for working effectively and cooperating in the pursuit of our shared aims. It has led directly to greater prosperity, increased trade, investment in jobs, better security and a greener environment. Britain is better off in the EU." That's what we believe in, but we also accept the results of the referendum. So what are we going to do? What's the best deal that we can get? What worries me is the kind of deal that we're going to get is going to be fantastic for the City of London, great for big corporations and heavy industries, rubbish for our farmers, rubbish for our fishermen, and areas like the South Hams are going to be sold down the river in order for those big donors to the Tory party to do very nicely, thank you very much.
If you're elected MP for Totnes, how will you deal with those issues in Parliament and reflecting the wishes of the people of Totnes?
Well, I mean, Totnes is half, 60% of the constituency is the South Hams, 40% of it is in the Torbay area. Torbay voted to Brexit. So I think we need to understand that. Whatever deal they come up with, if it's not good for the local area, then I won't be in favour of it and I'd vote against it. We've also said that we want to have a second referendum on the deal so that British people can see we voted to come out, but we didn't vote on what kind of deal we get. We think there should be a second referendum on the deal that we get. So that you can decide whether you voted Remain or whether you voted to come out of Europe. You can decide whether you think actually this deal is what I voted for. And if you don't think, then you can vote to not against the deal. And if that happens and they lose the referendum, then we'd probably stay in the EU. My view is, let's get on with it. Let's get out of the EU, then the sooner we can get back in.
Thank you very much. So Sarah most famously had her on the Today programme.
Yes, I'm still picking the splinters out from crossing the fence. Just to respond to one point that was made about the South Hams. Yes, the South Hams did vote to remain, but Torbay voted very strongly to leave. And if you look at, academic studies have looked at what that means for us on a constituency basis, and taking all of the people within this constituency into account, this constituency voted by 54% to leave. But the job of the person that you vote to be your representative is to try and bring this together. It was extraordinarily divisive, the referendum, and we need to move on from that. But what we must do, in my view, is accept the result, but now make sure that just because we're leaving the European Union, we are not leaving Europe. We must have a constructive and friendly relationship. That departure has to be a smooth process. I know that we're seeing a lot of sabre rattling at the moment, a lot of leaking to the press, but I think once the German elections are out of the way, I think we can expect to see both sides settle down and to reach something that is in our mutual best interests. And I personally regret the decision. I would suggest, Jerry, that you don't go to Brixham and tell people that they didn't make an educated decision, because I think this is one of the things that annoys people, is telling them that they didn't know what they were voting for. That was the purpose of the referendum. We accept the result, we move on and make it as constructive as possible. I think we need to look at the opportunities that we have. I think that Julian's absolutely right that we mustn't see the interests of fishermen and farmers negotiated away as part of a wider deal. I'm encouraged by the fact that we're going to see protection within the Conservative manifesto of their subsidies until 2022, and that will give us an opportunity to look at things around farming, about how we make farming subsidies work better. There are real problems with the way the Common Agricultural Policy has worked, and we have an opportunity now to redesign something that does more to protect Devon's farmers and to look at how we balance that with protecting our environment. So I think there are opportunities, as well as things that many of us in this room will regret about leaving the European Union. As your representative up to the dissolution, I'm very pleased to see that a recommendation from our Brexit and Health inquiry that the Health Select Committee undertook, which was that the 140,000 people who work in health and care must be allowed to stay, and that is set out explicitly in the Conservative manifesto, and I'm very pleased to see that.
Thank you very much.
The Green Party always supported the Remain campaign, and as an individual involved in what was actually groups of us got together from the different parties and pushed for Remain, had stalls, and it was very interesting, some of those conversations. And there was huge hope. I don't think any of us that were actively involved, maybe we were just living in a bubble, but we never expected the result that happened. But I was at the count, I think it was about 3:20 in the morning when they said, oh yes, we've done it, 52.3% Remain in South Hants. But actually, what was really interesting was then people saying, well, have you looked at what's happening around the country? And somebody suddenly said, well, why was it that we didn't think to have at least 60% requirement before we actually go through, such a devastating...
40% requirement as a threshold would have satisfied that need, the 40% threshold. You need 60%.
No, I'm saying that you should have had, across the vote, you should have had at least 60%, so it's not kind of so divisive. Because this is the tragedy. It's been so divisive, and I think any government that does something which, any local organisation could have told you how to run a vote much better than that. So I was really shocked. But I mean, nevertheless, we have, as we all say, we are where we are. And where we are is actually a position where we need to be really rethinking this before we take some more major mistakes. So the Green Party is very, very keen that we should actually have a second referendum on the deal. And we should look, and that will give us all the opportunity to properly look at the deal. And I call here for a proper public consultation, not one that starts at the beginning of August and ends on the day the kids go back to school. One that's properly across a period of time when people can really debate the issues and understand it, and not have, the Boris version of fake news, which wasn't even called fake news then, was it? But it is now. And I think we need to make sure that we really understand what we're voting for. And because a lot of people who we were talking to in the remaining activities last year, they didn't really know what happened with Europe, why Europe was so important, what were the deals, how did it influence our laws, what were the links. And I think people have a much greater understanding now. So if there's one thing that's been good out of all of this, it's a clear understanding, and maybe people listening a little bit more carefully and understanding what goes on. But we do need to make sure that we have that referendum so that people can understand. And one of the options on that deal should be that we remain in. People can have a second chance to think about it, so they know that it's not, well, it's that or nothing. It's actually that, or we actually stay where we are, stay where we are. Because we have had huge security, we have huge, good environmental protections, and all the things that have been trotted out, so I won't repeat all of that. But one of the clear things is to guarantee the rights of EU citizens in this country.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you.
If the Conservatives win a majority on June the 8th, then your party's position is that Parliament will decide on the deal which is struck. So your party was very split on the whole Brexit thing, just much like the country was. How confident are you that Conservative MPs who don't like the deal that Theresa May comes back with might actually have the courage to stand up in Parliament and say, no, we're not going to vote for it, bearing in mind that this is something that could last generations and generations and not just for the duration of the next Parliament? Do you think that Remain voting Conservatives might actually have the courage to say, no, we don't, if for example, she pulls us out of the single market and goes for a really hard Brexit? Are you confident that they would do that? Would you do that?
Well, I think what we have to do is look at the deal that we get at the end of it. I think that is a hypothetical question, because I think that if we go into this process and we are, as other parties are suggesting, saying right at the beginning of it that we're going to have a second referendum to take us out of the European Union, it is a direct incentive for us to get the worst possible deal. So I think to answer that question before we start negotiations is the worst thing to do at the start of that process. I'm sorry, I will always say that when a vote comes up in Parliament, every parliamentarian has a responsibility to look at exactly what is in front of them and to look at what the balance is of the interests of both their constituents and the country. And there have been many occasions on which I've been prepared to vote against my own government. I think perhaps my most frequent rebellion was on the issue of votes at 16. I think had we had votes at 16, the result might have gone the other way. But I assure you that I will look carefully at the result. But I do think that we have to go into this absolutely understanding that the principle here is that we respect the outcome of the referendum, and I think it would be a huge mistake to go into this promising that I'd be prepared to vote to actually overturn the deal and send us back into Europe. What we'll be voting on is what the nature of the deal is and whether or not we need to demand that the government go back and think again. And of course, as your MP, I would be going back and looking exactly at where we are and thinking about whether that is in our best interest or whether we need to ask the government to go back to Europe and negotiate further. But we shouldn't be going back and saying that we don't accept the result of the referendum, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to Brexit. We've only got 15 minutes left, and we've got so much ground still to cover. Can we now move to health issues? And can we take a question, please, from Samantha Gothard? Samantha, up in the box.
Hello. Compared to other European countries, the UK ranks very low in terms of percentage GDP spending on health. Why? What would your party see the direction of travel to be?
Julian.
Yes, thank you for that. And it's rather shaming that that's the situation. We feel that we have grass and metal there. We've said that we put a penny on income tax in order to invest directly into the National Health Service. That's £4 billion a year for the health service and £2 billion a year for social care. But further than that, we would look at introducing a form of a type of national insurance in a way, which national insurance is meant to do anyway, but a type of national insurance which is a hypothecated tax, so that the Commission decides how much money the NHS needs in order to keep up with other European countries and our spending on percentages of GDP. And we raise that tax, and that tax is set aside purely for the NHS and not to be spent on other issues. It's a bit like education. As a country, we have to decide how much we're prepared to pay for the services that we love and cherish. And people just have to, as individuals, you have to take that decision. What I worry about is that we're becoming, as I said in my opening remarks, I think we're becoming more and more selfish. You know, that I'm all right, it won't happen to me. And I think that it was quite funny, I'm sure they didn't mean to, but I thought that the policy that came out about social care, about how you're going to have to pay, use all your inheritance up paying for until you get to the last 100,000, actually concentrated people's mind. That if you want to live in a civilised country, then you have a sort of social insurance. And that social insurance means that those that fall foul, or through no fault of their own become ill, or have a disease or whatever, that we have all paid into the pot for them to for them to be looked after. And I think that that's the kind of country that we should encourage that. I definitely think within our manifesto that it aims to do that. So I hope that we will soon catch up as far as percentage of GDP is, and I think that we've made a good step forward with our manifesto pledge.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
Thank you. Well, the Green Party has made a pledge in its policies to bring back the health service into complete public ownership. A big part of the problem has been the drain on the public services from the use of our services for private healthcare systems that are just in many ways parasitic. I think one of the things that really I find difficult about this is the fact that actually there's so much fear incited into people. People are frightened, starting to get frightened to get ill, they're frightened to get old. And that's something very, very wrong. I mean, our health services should give us the confidence that we are safe. And fear, as I say, it's not good for our health, so we've got to think about that. We are looking more and more these days about health and well-being, so there's a bigger programme as well. But it doesn't mean to say that we can't afford basic health services, so we would plug that funding gap. And I think as the questioner has asked about the fact that we're one of the lower ones in Europe, we should be matching the best in Europe. We have the expertise, we have we have fantastic resource, which is our staff. And in many ways, we have to really admire the way that they've hung in there. And the fact they've taken to the streets and protested, and the junior doctors, I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary times to see people having to protest for their jobs and for their future. And it's also for our future. So, the Green Party that's one of the basic ones, is to actually privatise services, but also to look at how we deal with mental health as well. We need to rebalance some of that, bring some more funding into those services. And I think we just need to remember that actually a lot of people now are being squeezed into the situation of starting to take out private health schemes. So in fact, people think that they can't afford our health services. Actually, if we had all public ownership again, people wouldn't be having to invest in people, which is actually creating worse problems. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jackie.
We already pay for our NHS every day from the minute we start working to the minute we stop paying tax and national insurance. However, there are a few people who get away with paying less tax and they earn a dog's eye more than the rest of us. Labour's committed to increasing tax for the highest 5% of earners in the UK. Now that 5% can afford to look after the other 95. I'm not saying that they work any less hard than us. However, our plans as a Labour Party are to invest another £6 billion into the NHS, provide free parking for everyone at the NHS. The Labour Party created the NHS. The last thing they want to see is it disappear. And one of the main points that has come out is to appoint a new Minister for Mental Health. Mental health is the forgotten part of our NHS. There's so many people with various different mental health issues within this country who may not even be heard, nevertheless be heard loud enough.
Thank you very much. Is the problem the coalition government's legislation on the health service, which of course the Lib Dems supported? I know that Sarah had some issues with it, but the Lib Dems got firmly behind it, following Baroness Williams' lead. And therefore, the question for Sarah, but something that maybe Julian wants to come back to, if it is the legislation that is at the root of any problems that there may be in the NHS, what are the Lib Dems' responsibilities? But first of all, Sarah, obviously this is your absolute area of expertise. You lead Parliament on it, and we look to you for the kind of wise guidance and leadership which your committee has shown to date on these issues. Why do we put such a small amount of GDP into the health service?
Well, first of all, can I just say that we spend 9.9% of GDP on health, and that is actually quite close to the European average. But my view has been always that we should move that towards 11 to 12% of GDP. The big question and challenge then will be who pays for that, and how do we do that in a fair way? My feeling is that we should look at the issues around intergenerational fairness if we're going to bring in very large extra amounts into the NHS, and I believe we do need to do so. And I think that if you think about the fact that every day, on average, life expectancy is increasing by 5 hours, that's an extraordinary figure. I think it's a very positive thing, but I'm afraid successive governments have failed to plan for what that means. And so I think it's a good thing that in the Conservative Manifesto there is a recognition that we do need to do something about funding, and we also need to consider intergenerational fairness. And there have been some very challenging things. For example, the proposal to means test winter fuel payments, with all of that hypothecated into the NHS. I think, unfortunately, these are part of the tough choices we're going to have to make, because I think that we have to think about how we spread the cost of this between a relatively proportionately diminishing working age population and those who are living in retirement. So if we want to move up to 11% to 12% of GDP, all of us have to make a contribution to that. And there are many things that my committee in the last Parliament recommended that could actually help to move us towards that. And I think that we do need to take this, grasp the metal, and actually move this on. And it applies to both health and social care. There are so many things. I'm sorry, you probably don't want me to talk for an hour. I could talk to you, talk a lot about how we can actually move to better integrate health and social care, how we can actually get away from the purchaser-provider split. And I think it's one of the very encouraging and rather surprising things you may feel in the Tory manifesto, that it explicitly talks about that, about moving away from that wasteful purchaser-provider split.
And do we need a new NHS Act?
I think what we do need to do is look at the way that there are too many barriers to proper integration with health and social care. And my view is that we need an NHS Act that will allow us to have a single health and social care department so that we can genuinely move this forward, that we can genuinely look at some of the barriers and waste and variation within the health service, how we can focus on our workforce, how we can nurture, develop and train our workforce. So there are very many challenges facing the health service. Funding is only one of them, but of course it's a very important challenge.
But is the current legislative framework sufficient to deliver the type of NHS that you would like to achieve?
No, I think there do need to be legislative changes, and those legislative changes should focus on how we integrate health and social care and make the system work better and tackle variation and nurture our workforce. So those, I think, are the key challenges as we go forward. I think that there are, of course, important funding pledges from all of the political parties. But as I've said before, unless you have a strong economy, you can't pay for any of this. And I think we need to focus on that.
Thank you. Am I missing people up there? I probably am.
Hello, yes, I'm David Matthews from Totnes, and I've been on some demonstrations recently at hospitals around this area, and I've met people close to tears and in great despair because wards are closing, women's wards in Torbay are closing. I've met people who are absolutely desperately sad and cannot believe what's happening to the NHS. I get a distinct impression from all my research on this that the Tory party does not care really about the NHS. It would prefer to see it in a bad light so it can be carved up and sold off to the highest.
Absolutely not.
There is an elephant in the room, and it is about this present government's capacity to throw a lot of negative publicity at things they feel threaten it. That's not unusual in politics, but the NHS was created here in this place. The NHS was born here at Dartington. It was Michael Young, who later became Lord Young, who sat here with a few other people from the Labour Party, 1945, and they created a document for the Labour Party manifesto for 1945, including the NHS. It's a great treasure. We should cherish it, honour it, we should make sure it survives. And you see this process of attrition, little by little, by 1,000 cuts, making it look unviable and trying to make it look bad. Yeah. And we also have the issue of It seems to me that the trend of the last few years has been, whether it's conscious or not, to create a civilization where there are a few million baffled, scared, impoverished people to service the needs of a few rich people. That is my honest observation.
One more observation on the NHS. Yes, the hand there. I don't know who it's attached to. There we are.
Thank you. My name is Pat Oates. I'm a senior hospital consultant. One of the things that frightens me in the NHS is the looming crisis in the workforce, which is overlooked and actually will not be addressed by any amount of money that is put into the service. The local STP, Sustainability and Transformation Plan, has been suppressed until after the election. Yeah. But it doesn't matter whether you look at general practice, A&E, respiratory medicine, oncology, maternity. In every service that currently exists, we are facing a monumental workforce crisis, which isn't going to be solved for a generation. Unfortunately, the junior doctors that I work with are profoundly demoralised, and you can feel the emotion in my voice, in that we have massive gaps in our junior doctor rotas, which are increasing. And the Royal College of Paediatrics recently published a workforce statement which showed that nationally in paediatrics we have 241 consultant vacancies. We have over 700 gaps in what is predicted to be required to deliver in the future. And I don't know where this is going, but it is a very, very serious problem.
Thank you for that. Very helpful. I'd also like to thank our questioner that pointed out that it is in this very hallowed hall that the NHS found its birth. So that's something really to celebrate about Dartington. We really are running out of time. I want to deal with one other big issue. And I'm going to take two questions at the same time, if that's okay. I want to hear from Mark Elcardie, please, and also Alison Williams, if you could follow that, wherever you are, Alison, with just a very quick point on refugees. So Mark, please, if you could. Thank you, Mark.
Hello there, yeah. My name is Mark Elcardie, I'm a local resident. My question is, rather than the UK profiteering, continuing to profiteer from arms sales to terrorist-creating states like Saudi Arabia, as Theresa May is insistent on doing, and unquestioningly backing endless US wars for regime change, often using so-called moderate terrorists as proxy pawns, is it not time the UK had its own truly ethical and peacemaking foreign policy? Some sanity now for all.
Alison Williams, I'm from Totnes Citizens UK, and I'd like to ask, the last government offered to take up to 3,000 unaccompanied child refugees in Europe. That offer was recently withdrawn. If elected, would members of the panel, would you work with Safe Passage and Citizens UK to meet that pledge?
Thank you very much.
Yes, we would. And as part of our manifesto that we would re-endorse the Dubs Amendment, and so the 3,000 unaccompanied children from Syria would be more than welcome in this country. And we go further than that. We also open our doors to 50,000 refugees in the length of the Parliament from Syria. I do think that as a country, one of the things that's made us great has been our welcoming of refugees, those fleeing persecution from across the world. It's made this country great, it's made it rich in its diversity, and long may we stop that, driven by a rather nasty, xenophobic, nationalistic idea that somehow refugees and immigrants are bad for this country. It's just plain wrong, and we should do everything we can.
And is there such a thing as an ethical foreign policy?
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. And again, I believe it's in our manifesto that we would not sell arms to Saudi Arabia.
Yes, I think that these are very complex questions. I voted against when we first were asked to vote about action in Syria, and it's a very difficult issue because subsequently many people have written to say that was the wrong decision because had we taken action then, we might have prevented the murder of his own citizens by Assad through further chemical weapons attacks that we've seen recently. I voted for us to take action in Libya because the occupants of a major city were under imminent threat of being completely annihilated. And I felt that it was right at that point to take action to prevent a genocide. But the trouble is, wherever we intervene, it seems whether we intervene or not, we can get these things wrong. And so I think foreign policy is immensely complex. So if ever you think there's easy answers to this, I would say think again.
But can it be underpinned as an ethical foreign policy?
Of course, it must be. And I think that, as I say, I think the days of us taking a major intervention with boots on the ground are over. But then one of the criticisms about Libya has been that we didn't actually then follow up and put in sufficient peacekeeping to actually stop what we've seen now, which is Libya turning into a failed state. But I'd say these are very complex issues, and it's very easy to reduce them to something simplistic. But of course they should be. And refugees, yes, I think Britain should welcome refugees. I think we can be very proud of what we have done in terms of our foreign aid, our development aid in the region. We're the second biggest unilateral donor to the region after the USA. And I think that when you look at the programmes, no, it's not enough. And I think it's right that we also accept refugees. And I think that when you look at the tensions here, should we accept the most vulnerable refugees who can't get to Europe? And should we prioritise our action there? I believe it's the right thing to do that. And to actually take people directly from camps in the region who are the most vulnerable. And I think we should be proud of the programme that we have carried out in the vulnerable persons resettlement schemes for those, for example, who are women who've been subject to rape and violence in conflict. So I think those are some positive things. We've also committed to taking 3,000 children from the region. But yes, I accept that there's been a great deal of anger that we didn't also accept 3,000 children from Europe. But I think sometimes there is an issue here about whether or not the people who most benefit from encouraging people to make those journeys are the traffickers and putting people in grave danger. So I think it is right that we focus our efforts on helping people within the region and also taking the most vulnerable refugees who cannot use the services of people traffickers and prioritise them for resettlement.
Thank you, Sarah.
Well, the Green Party in its manifesto does have an ethical policy that builds capacity for conflict resolution and ends support for aggressive wars of intervention, and no more arms sales to aggressive regimes. So that's really clear, and that's part of our pledges and manifesto. Absolutely support that. But I think we actually need to look at what we're doing in terms of our exports, because we're actually sort of trading on armaments, and it's just wrong. It gives a wrong message to other regimes. I think it's one of the things that builds the fear in this country, and it builds the fear elsewhere. And we can do things differently. We also look at trade rules that respect human rights, labour standards, environmental standards and climate commitments. And this is actually really important because a lot of other countries are already suffering from the impacts of climate change. We're in sort of where we are as a temperate country is quite, we're pretty okay apart from flooding. But other countries are finding it's much more difficult to grow food, they're experiencing major droughts, and that actually really does wind people up. It winds up societies, and it winds up, angry young men, which makes the world a much more dangerous place. And if we can actually have these conversations about building capacity about how we deal with conflict resolution around the table, we don't need to send young men to war. We don't need to worry about having the acts that we're seeing at the moment. So I think we can actually build that much better. And I think in terms of the refugees, I think we should never have just said no. I think the Dartington was good, it was strong, and to reverse that when people thought, well, that's happening. A lot of people in this area, as I said earlier, have been involved in the network, which has been absolutely incredible, absolutely fantastic. I've been humbled by people's compassion and the ideas and the imagination, and also the people that have been very actively working in this for a long time. It hasn't all just sort of sprung up in this area in the last couple of years. But we are prepared here, and the people that have come have been welcomed and warmly welcomed. And I think it's, if we're here ready, why not just open that door? Calais and Dunkirk still exist. People are still suffering in those areas in parts of France. And there's young people seriously at risk. And I think we need to just open the door and say, let's make this happen. We can do it if we want to.
Thank you, John. So, let's
the Labour Party leader has made it quite clear where he stands on war and ongoing. He's definitely the peaceful negotiating type. He doesn't believe that we need to start throwing weapons about. He's definitely committed to stopping all unethical arms exports. I just want to bring everyone in the room back to a point that was made by a lady right at the beginning, and you all gave her a rapturous round of applause, and that was Sandy. Sandy said it was up to us to make sure that we were educating the people in these places about where to go forwards and how to take this from their children and deal with it at grassroots. What message are we sending those people if we're refusing them entry to teach them how to do exactly that?
Thank you very much. I'm afraid it's already on 9, so we do have to draw things to a close. So unfortunately we don't have time to address fox hunting, nor do we have time to deal with the bigger questions of income inequality and further questions on social care. But we are so grateful to you for putting those questions forward to us. So in our last few minutes that we have available to us, I'm going to give the panel 30 seconds each just to sell themselves to you, and they've got to tell you why you should vote for them in a couple of weeks' time. So let's hear from you first, Sarah.
Well, I hope that you'll support me because I've shown myself to be an independent-minded parliamentarian, and I've been voted twice Parliamentarian of the Year because I think it is important that Parliament has a key role in holding government to account and to actually looking carefully at policies and also doing everything that I can, even where perhaps I haven't agreed, to try and represent and put views to the government for those who come to see me in my surgery.
Thank you very much.
If elected to be Green Party Member of Parliament, which I will be very proud to be, I give my pledge that I will bring my strong background in community work to benefit all the residents in this constituency. I believe in supporting the community voice and helping people understand the issues so that everyone can be more involved in the decisions affecting their lives. The current economic challenges mean we need hard-working politicians to ensure everyone has good access to jobs, facilities and services that support and enrich our lives. And I believe the Green Party offers a vision for positive change. I would ask you to vote for what you believe in on June the 8th. Don't think about what it may or may not happen if you think about voting for that one or that one. Vote for what you believe in.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I firmly believe that this country is now at a crossroads, and the direction that we take will affect us and our generations to come for years and years. What we need now is a very strong and traditional liberal voice in this country, and that's liberal in society, in the way that we deal with people, in the way we accept those less fortunate than ourselves, and the way that we look after our environment. So I very much hope that you will look towards a liberal Britain to take us through these uncertain times. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, I'd like you to vote for me on June the 8th, because I say I am. The one thing I have in my personal favour is that I'm honest and my integrity is clear. I am the newbie to the panel. However, I do believe it wasn't that long ago that Sarah was in the same boat herself as the newbie to the panel. My trade union roots keep me grounded. I'm very level-headed. And although I look for change, I can make one promise now, is that I'm not going to change.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to thank our 4 panellists. I think we've had a tour de force. We've looked at the local, the national, the global. I think we've managed to drill down into some very, very key, core and interesting issues. I think you understand what their policies are for their parties. I think you understand how they will approach us as constituents. And I think we know a little bit more about them. And I think they are 4 truly fine individuals. And I really do believe this. I think we would be blessed to have any of them representing us. So I'd just like to thank you for your involvement and for making this such an enjoyable and rich occasion. And I'd like to thank Dartington and Kerry particularly for really making this event happen. So good luck all 4 of you on June the 8th. And my understanding is the bar is open.